You're scrolling through your feed, and suddenly, a massive influencer or public figure collapses, a brutal call-out video, or a public embarrassment that ruins them completely. You know you should feel bad for them. You know empathy is the moral answer. But deep down inside, a subtle, instinctual rush of satisfaction hits your brain. It feels electric, a tiny, quiet kick of dopamine from watching someone else get destroyed. Why does a part of you actually enjoy it? We like to think we're completely good people. Society trains us to treat cruelty like a rare glitch, an alien defect that only bad people possess. We wear moral masks everywhere we go, curating perfect, empathetic online personas. But modern neuroscience paints a very different picture. Cruelty isn't a broken wire in the human brain. It's a deeply rooted feature, a factory setting installed millions of years ago that we've simply learned to hide. To understand why, we have to look past simple malice. This isn't about being a monster. It's about survival, status, and self-preservation. Your brain was built for a world of zero-sum competition, where someone else's loss directly felt like your gain. Cruelty isn't an external force. It is an internal survival mechanism that your neural wiring actively rewards. Rewind tens of thousands of years to when humans lived in small, tight-knit tribes. Resources were strictly limited. Food, protection, and mates weren't infinite. In that world, life was a strict ladder. If a powerful rival in your group stumbled or suffered a massive loss of status, your relative position automatically went up. Their failure opened up immediate opportunities for you. So evolutionary logic taught the brain a simple lesson. A competitor's downfall is directly good for your survival. This brings us to a specific psychological phenomenon known as schadenfreude. It means taking pleasure in someone else's pain. It's not just random spite. It's an ancient neurological calculation. When you watch someone higher than you stumble, the brain registers it as a zero-sum victory. You didn't have to work hard or risk injury, yet your social standing improved anyway. It is free, effortless elevation. And the human mind loves a shortcut. In early human groups, cruelty served another vital purpose: group survival. A selfish member who took food without helping threatened the entire tribe's existence. So targeted collective hostility became a tool to punish free riders and enforce strict rules. Public shaming and exile weren't just social acts, they were biological death sentences. By enjoying the act of punishing an outsider or rule breaker, tribal members kept each other in line and guaranteed the group stayed strong. There is another reason our ancestors leaned into cruelty. It creates instant social trust. Nothing bonds a group faster than a shared enemy. When you attack an outsider together, you signal total loyalty to your allies. It proves you aren't a traitor. Mutual contempt builds stronger alliances than mutual affection ever could. Shared malice acts like psychological glue, locking the tribe together against a hostile world. Your brain is constantly scanning for where you fit, running a background program of relative comparison. It doesn't ask, "Am I doing well?" It asks, "Am I doing better than them?" When someone else stumbles, the metric shifts, and without moving an inch, you feel safer. That brief sense of relief is the brain tricking you into feeling victorious. Modern neuroscience backs this up with hard data. When researchers put subjects into fMRI brain scanners and show them photos of high-status rivals failing, a specific region lights up like a Christmas tree, the ventral striatum. This isn't the brain's guilt center. It is the exact same pleasure node that fires when you eat delicious food or win money. Your brain processes someone else's public humiliation as a literal physical treat. The reason this feels so addictive is because of dopamine. This molecule doesn't just register pleasure, it drives our desire to seek it out again. Cruelty, especially against those we think deserve it, creates a massive chemical spike. The brain calculates that enforcing justice, even through malicious means, is highly valuable work. So it provides a heavy chemical payoff, ensuring you'll jump at the next chance to see someone fall. To understand why we can feel pleasure in someone else's pain, we must understand a key empathetic filter. Our brains are built to suppress empathy, but it is not a random process. This specific suppression is managed by the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ. This region functions like a gatekeeper, temporarily reducing our internal distress signal when the other person is categorized as an enemy. This is not about being evil, it is simply the biological mechanics of survival. This ancient wiring didn't disappear, it just found a new home. Enter the digital amplifier. Social media algorithms are perfectly tuned to exploit this exact neural vulnerability. The internet creates rapid-fire us versus them conflicts, categorizing entire groups as the enemy to be silenced. Outrage gets prioritized over empathy. turning public callouts and massive pile-ons into low-risk, immediate sources of dopamine. The platforms provide the context, and your brain provides the primal drive. But the brain doesn't just enjoy cruelty in secret. It's at its most potent when it's loud, public, and dressed in virtue. This is the dangerous high of righteous cruelty. When we believe we are on the good side, punishing the bad side doesn't feel like malice, it feels like justice. The brain's chemical reward for doing the right thing is mixed with the ancient rush of dominance, creating an intoxicating cocktail. It is a moral license to inflict pain while convincing yourself you are a good person. How does the mind shut off its natural empathy safeguards? It uses language. This is the mechanism of linguistic dehumanization. The brain's moral center requires a human target to activate empathy. So, to make cruelty acceptable, we change the labels. We stop seeing people and start seeing concepts. The opposition, the problem, the enemy. Modern online culture excels at this, reducing a complex human being to a single label or an easy-to-digest meme is a psychological trick. It allows the brain to bypass ethical safeguards and treat a living person like a hostile obstacle. But perhaps the darkest twist is that the cruelty we inflict on others is often a confession. This is the psychological mirror paradox. When we attack someone with excessive, vicious hatred, it is rarely about them. It is about something we hate in ourselves. Psychological projection allows the ego to survive by taking repressed flaws, greed, arrogance, or insecurity, and literally placing them onto a target. It's a powerful mental trick. By destroying the mirror reflection, you delude yourself into believing that the flaw has been eliminated from your own mind. When we step into a crowd or log into an aggressive online community, something critical shifts in our moral operating system. Personal accountability evaporates. This is the core of mob psychology. The crowd provides perfect anonymity. The guilt of engaging in cruelty is diffused, shared among hundreds or thousands of others. I is replaced by we, and we can do things that I would never dream of. The mob feels intoxicatingly powerful. It functions as a safe space for our collective dark impulse, rationalizing collective cruelty as group survival. It turns personal malice into a form of public service. This brings us inevitably to Carl Jung. Jung theorized that every human possesses a shadow. The shadow is the psychological basement where we shove everything we dislike about ourselves, our jealousy, our capacity for violence, and yes, our primal enjoyment of cruelty. Most of us spend our entire lives pretending the basement doesn't exist. We tell ourselves, I am purely a good person, but this repression is a dangerous illusion. By denying your shadow, you allow it to control you. It will strike from the dark when you least expect it, often wearing the mask of moral outrage. So, how do we stop playing the brain's toxic game? The first step is radically simple. Observe the reflex. In the split second before you engage, you hit like, retweet, or post that snarky reply, stop. Notice the internal rush. Admit that watching a competitor fall feels safe and satisfying to your deepest instincts. This awareness, this refusal to immediately feed the animal drive, breaks the cycle. You aren't denying the impulse, you are mastering it. Once you can catch the reflex, you have a new option. Don't destroy the energy, redirect it. The drive for dominance, that primal need to win, doesn't have to be used for tearing others down. Instead of wasting that aggressive energy on public cruelty, use it to build yourself up. Compete against your own limitations, not people online. Channel that competitive instinct into massive effort and personal discipline. The ultimate form of superiority is mastering the dark machinery that was built to control you. We are not purely good. We are complicated, ancient organisms built to survive in a violent, competitive world. The brain actively rewards cruelty because cruelty was once highly effective. It keeps you safe. It keeps you high. It is the primal drug of dominance. So why fight it? Because when you give in to the instinct, you are letting an antique survival program dictate your worth. You become predictable. You become controlled. Real power, the kind the brain cannot create on its own, doesn't come from feeding off someone else's collapse. It comes from mastering the dark wiring inside your own head. The choice is yours. Thanks for watching.